Many thanks to one original DayZ servers, Close servers, Sgt. Pepper servers, Sea of Tools Cloud, We The Remain Roleplay, DayZ Sentinel servers, the Struggle Community, the Karma Crew servers, and DayZ Kraken leaderboards for making this video possible. DayZ 1.26 has introduced more loot changes than I've ever seen in a patch, so in this video we're going to be checking out the huge changes to loot on Chernarus and Livonia, go over why loot is now broken on these maps, which items have become exclusive or removed from certain maps, and how it's now possible to get contaminated loot without the need of NBC gear. Most of the loot changes in 1.26 are to high tier weapons, so in effect, these loot changes greatly impact loot progression too. Starting on Chernarus with the 101, it's been moved from tier 4 only to helis and convoys, with its mag and the 5.56 ammo boxes being moved to these locations too, so only loose 5.56 ammo can be found in higher tiers now. However, this is the first piece of broken loot on this list because you can find the mag in strange military locations such as these containers and these military Humvee wrecks, and these V3X wrecks too, some of which are spawning in low tiers, so I highly doubt this is intended. The 101 mags should not spawn in such low tiers. The AK-74 now spawns 50% more, with its ammo spawning nearly 3 times more often, and the 45 round mag that was super rare is now in tier 4 instead of static contaminated areas. But again, this mag spawns very strangely, again is broken, sometimes appearing at Northwest Airfield tents and military vehicles across the map. Not particularly convoys, just random military vehicles, again possible to find in low tier areas. On the flip side, the baby AK-74 will be harder to find now as it's been moved up a tier from tier 2 to tier 3. The AKM will be found more though, as 3 can spawn on a server instead of 1, that's an increase of 3 times, and it's moved from contaminated areas to tier 4, but again the AKM can potentially spawn in lower tiers inside these containers or found at Northwest Airfield tents. The huge 75 drum mag for this weapon is much easier to find too, doubling how many will spawn now and spawning in tier 4 instead of helis and convoys, with this one thankfully spawning where the game code says it should spawn, unlike the broken loot that I mentioned before, but the broken loot problems do get much worse. The maximum amount of M16s is now set to 2, down from 7 last patch, spawning exclusively at helis and convoys instead of tier 3+, so the M16 is going to be much harder to find, with the 10 and 20 round C mags being much harder to find too, also only spawning at helis and convoys now, with the 30 and 40 round C mags spawning only inside contaminated areas, so these are super rare, so the 5.56 ammo in general will be certainly much harder to find in this patch on Chernarus. The mini AUG will also be harder to find as only 2 will spawn instead of 5, and the AUG mag will only spawn at helis and convoys now instead of tier 3+, so this is going to be harder to find, making 5.56 again much harder to find, and probably the rarest ammo type on Chernarus right now, but not as rare as the AS Val because it was removed from Chernarus entirely. The LAR is much harder to find too, not spawning at helis and convoys anymore, but only contaminated areas, the static ones, spawning a maximum of 3 instead of 5 last patch. The Scorpion, SG5K and Bison plus their magazines now spawn in tier 2+, which all used to spawn in tier 1 last patch. The CR75, 1911, MK2 and FNX have been moved up too, all spawning in higher tiers, but they do still spawn in tier 1, making pistols and SMGs much more likely to find in higher tier areas. And also the Longhorn has been added to tier 1, only spawning in tier 2 and 3 previously. Inversely, the 133 shotgun was removed from tier 1 completely, so you can't find it there anymore, and the double barrel will now spawn in higher tiers too, which means again they're moving lower tier weapons up the ranks, so SMGs, pistols and shotguns will be competing with high tier weapons for spawn points in higher tiers. The Vega shotgun was also moved to, now spawning in tier 2 and 3 instead of 3 and 4, and its mag, the drum mag, will be much easier to find due to it not spawning in contaminated areas. It now spawns in tier 4, but due to the drum mag being a broken piece of loot, it can spawn at Northwest Airfield tents and random military wrecks like the AK-74 45 round mag can. And before anybody assumes that tier areas have changed, and I might have missed that, they are exactly the same as last patch. Finally for Chernarus, onto rifles. The Mosin has moved down a tier, spawning in tier 2 and 3 instead of 3 and 4, but the SKS, like on Sakhal and Livonia, has been moved up a tier to tier 3, so it no longer spawns in tier 2 or lower. The amount of Tundras that can spawn has been reduced from 10, now spawning 4 per map, but the Blaze is up to 25 from 20 last patch. The DMR will spawn less too, from 3 to 2, and while the game file says it spawns in tier 4, it still only spawns in helis and convoys all over the map, not just tier 4, making the XML files quite unreliable, as I'm guessing some hidden code somewhere this patch has broken the loot and it's now spawning wherever the hell it wants to. But I tested all loot spawns in this video to double check that it is correct, with the DMR mags correctly spawning where they should, tier 4 instead of tier 3 and 4 last patch. Conversely, the VSS did the opposite, spawning in 3 and 4 instead of 4 last patch. And finally for Chernarus, the SVD mag is only found in contaminated areas now instead of tier 4. Pretty much all the weapon and mag changes that you've seen on Chernarus that I've just mentioned have also changed on Livonia. For example, the 101 will now spawn in level 3 of the bunker instead of level 2. Well, that's what the game files say anyway, because it still spawns on level 2 in the same place as the last patch, but now more will spawn. Instead of 2 AK-101 spawning, 7 will spawn, with all of them spawning right next to each other. But because there's not enough spawn points for 7 AK-101s to spawn, only 4 are here. I believe this has caused a bug to occur in the bunker on Livonia, as the mini AUG is supposed to spawn in level 3 also now this patch instead of all over the bunker, but there aren't enough spawn points for the mini AUG to spawn, so the mini AUG has maybe accidentally been removed from Livonia entirely, and I did dozens of server wipes to try and get it to spawn, but it never spawned, so it joins the list of weapons that no longer spawn on Livonia this patch, shown here. You might notice that the LAR mag is on here too, the only magazine for this weapon, because it doesn't spawn on Livonia either. Even though the game files do say that it should spawn on Livonia, it does not spawn, and even though the LAR still spawns on Livonia, being moved from heli convoys to contaminated areas only, so you will need to switch to another map to get the magazine for the LAR, and also the attachments don't spawn on Livonia either. On the plus side, the AKM spawns twice as often on this map and has been moved from contaminated areas to helis and convoys, but its drum mag spawns twice per server instead of 5 times per server. The M16 also spawns twice as often and is much easier to find compared to last patch. It used to spawn in contaminated areas, now it's tier 3, which is the highest tier on Livonia, with the 40 round mag also joining it in tier 3, spawning a huge 5 times more often this patch, and the 60 round Stanag has also been moved to tier 3, so getting 5.56 rounds and magazines is going to be much easier on Livonia compared to Sakhal and Chernarus. The Mosin will also be much easier to find on Livonia, spawning in all residential locations instead of all military locations last patch, and the SVD will be easier to get to simply because the mag for it will spawn in helis and convoys instead of contaminated areas on Chernarus or inside the bunker of Sakhal, so it's going to be easier to find certain items on Livonia compared to other maps. Kind of encouraging server hopping, I would say, with the SVD on Livonia being moved from contaminated areas to helis and convoys, and also doubling how many SVDs will spawn to. So if you want certain weapons, you're going to need to switch to certain maps if you want to get them easier. On the flip side, the DMR and both of its magazines was moved from helis and convoys to contaminated areas only, so on Livonia it's going to be harder to find, but it's actually easier to find because there's a bug at Radanen. The static gas zone there is broken in this patch. It doesn't cover the entire town, but it somehow still kills the infected, so you can walk straight past the dead infected. You don't even have to kill them, and then you can get yourself a free DMR and a DMR magazine without the need of NBC gear, which I'm pretty sure will get fixed soon. Hopefully they do fix this. It's quite broken actually for loot progression on Livonia. And finally for Livonia, heat packs were removed, and so was a lot of warmer clothing. So warmer clothing is going to be difficult to find on this map. Although a lot of loot was removed from Livonia, it currently has the only exclusive weapon spawning on it, so the AS Val will only be found on Livonia, along with all this other stuff here. Chernarus has a lot more exclusive loot, but bear in mind that the crossbow in the Derringer does spawn on other maps. It's only the Autumn and the Grey variants that don't, with Chernarus being the only map to get the camo plate carrier set. Sakhal's exclusive list is much larger, as you can imagine, with collating tablets and the filtering bottle with ice axe also only being found on Sakhal. To invert these lists, here are all the items that don't spawn on Chernarus but do spawn on either Livonia or Sakhal. The idea behind these loot changes in 1.26 is to create variety in loot between maps. So for example, on Livonia, you're not going to find winter gear. That makes sense. It's a summer map. Winter stuff wouldn't spawn there. It's a bit bugged at the moment, as you've seen from this video. They certainly will be making adjustments. It's important to give your feedback, saying what you do and don't like, and that's why I created these lists here, so you can get an overview of what spawns where or what doesn't spawn where, so we can get to a solution, because at the moment I can see that a lot of players aren't happy with the changes, and it'll probably take a couple of patches for them to fix the issues and also shuffle loot around so that players and developers are happy. During this time, due to the XML files basically lying to us, the loot finder tool won't be 100% accurate. I'm not about to update every single item in the game. There's 1,000 different items across 3 different maps. That would take forever. I'll wait for the developers to fix the issues, and then the loot finder will be up to date then. I will update you guys on the loot changes and the fixes to bug loot as this all develops. I'm sure there will be many changes. I'll keep you guys in the loop. Thank you very much for watching. Have a good day.